Hey, let me tell you a spooky story. It was January 6th in the year 1896. Our story takes place in Paris, a city full of prosperity, progress and thriving science and arts. It was the era later known as Belle Epoque, when new ideas and innovations popped left and right, conjured by brilliant people from all over the Western world. Only around a week ago, the Parisian public saw for the first time something that would change the world: moving pictures. A series of 10 short films made by Auguste and Louis Lumière finally got a greater audience after several private showings. And that day, January 6th, Lumière brothers would show their brand new moving pictures captured by their cinematograph machine. So that night, Parisians would see yet another demonstration of the wonders of science and the future of mass entertainment. And one of the Lumière's latest was a little movie later known as The Arrival of the Train. That night in the Grand Café, patrons entered a dimly lit room, which quickly filled up at its full capacity. Surrounded by other curious citizens, most sat down while others remaining stood at the back of the room. Everyone waited in anticipation for the new invention that they had heard so much about. The projectionist started to crank the machine, and a limelight-illuminated picture appeared on the screen. The audience gets quiet, giving their full attention to the image of a train station. The spectators saw lots of busy people actually moving on the station platform. They seemed so lifelike, as if you could just get up and touch them. And then, in the distance, they saw a train. It's far away at first, but it approaches the platform at a rapid speed. How were they able to take a real train and conjure it onto the screen as it is in real life? As it gets closer, the steel-made beast starts to feel uncomfortably big. The large screen only highlights the massive size of the train and its uncanny likeness to a real one. As it approaches, spectators hold their breaths instinctively. Their hands start to sweat as they nervously fidget around on their seats, eyes pinned to the screen. Just how close is the train gonna get? They swallow in anxiety and wipe their sweaty palms on their thighs, hearing gasps surrounding them in the darkness. Suddenly, the air is filled by a blood-curdling scream. The train was too close, it was about to crush everyone! Startled, others start to scream as well, and people start to run over each other to the back of the room and out of there. Some even jump over the seats in panic, while others try not to get trampled. The room was suddenly filled with mass hysteria. The cries and screams echo in the air with primal fear. The audience rushes to the door, leading them to safety, away from the metal beast. Meanwhile, the ones still remaining pay attention to the screen. The train had actually stopped on the platform. Uncanny scream people start to enter the beast, unaware of the hysteria it just caused. When they noticed the danger was over, sighs of relief and heavy breathing filled the room. Some were leaning against the wall, trying to collect themselves and comprehend what in the world just happened. Someone was lying on the floor, fainted. In only 50 seconds, these people had just witnessed something truly historical. An unbelievable achievement of modern technology that literally took their breath away. Nothing could have prepared them to the way cinematograph had captured real life. Out of breath, customers started to chuckle nervously. In fact, it had felt so lifelike, they thought an actual train was coming at them at full speed. It was truly something magical. Now, that may or may not sound familiar to you, you might have heard a similar story or anecdote before. It's a popular tale that has been told time and time again of how the first movie audiences in the late 19th century freaked out when they saw an approaching train. It had stirred so strong emotions and primal reactions that crowds fled in panic, thinking a real train was about to run over them. Now the thing is that this most likely isn't true at all.
It's fiction. It's an urban legend that never happened.
Several historians have studied archived evidence, concluding that the early reactions had been heavily exaggerated, so there is no reliable evidence of actual mass panic in the cinemas. But despite of this debunking by the historians, the story is still alive and well in the minds of people. It's been spread all over the internet, and if you check the movie out on sites like YouTube or IMDb, a lot of the comments mention the legend around it. It's a popular, half-remembered anecdote about how silly people were back then. And yeah, because obviously most of us don't read academic articles or books made by historians, the popular legend has stuck to this day as a true story. But how did this rumor came up to be if it isn't even true at all? Is there not a single ounce of truth behind it? That's what I wanted to find out. While telling the legend, if the panic-inducing movie is actually named at all, most people claim it to be a film made by Auguste and Louis Lumière, the French cinema pioneers. The movie's original French name is
L'arrivée d'un train à la Ciotat.
Yeah, thanks, robot lady. But let's just call it Arrival of the Train. While there are other very similar movies from the Lumières and others where a train approaches the camera, freaking the early cinemagoers out, I'll focus on the most well-known and discussed train movie. So, as you might have already thought, the legend itself sounds kinda unbelievable, doesn't it? These kind of panicking reactions, they seem really over the top, and after all, we are talking about a time period when in Western cultures, and especially their higher classes, showing these kinds of intense emotions was seen as socially unacceptable and cringe. And it's not like people were that dumb back in the day either. Imagine during the 3D movie boom in the late 2000s, what if everyone going to the cinema to see the Avatar started to scream and run away in panic because they thought the blue alien cats were coming out of the screen. But to be fair, at least in the 2000s, people were really familiar of what movies were, and that wasn't the case in the late 1800s. So it was likely that some of the audience members saw a moving picture for the very first time. And so could the illusion of the movie be so strong to an untrained eye that there is a possibility that some people would forget all social rules and the fact that they are watching something that's not real? Again with the 3D movies, I remember that we got a 3D television when I was a kid. Well, not exactly a little kid anymore, more like a teenager. But anyway, we got the TV, we got the 3D glasses, and this nature documentary about sea life. So I showed that movie to a friend, and she actually freaked out about it. She started to scream when she saw a turtle. Yeah, it was a really scary turtle. Okay, yeah, maybe all of this isn't so unbelievable after all. Yeah, but anyway, people at the time must have been aware that what they saw wasn't real, right? Especially if I point out that in the early cinemas, the projector itself was in the room with the audience. If they didn't straight up see it, then at least they could hear the noises the machine makes. And if you watch the Arrival of the Train now, you can see that it isn't really that hyper-realistic, especially by today's standards. It has a really shitty image quality to it, and the image is constantly flickering, and it's full of grain. It looks just like one of those Windows Movie Maker filters. Yeah, and at the time, the screen was relatively small, around 7 feet wide. And these are the things that the people noticed at the time as well. Some critics in the newspapers were yeah, it was pretty cool, but I wish it was less shitty image quality-wise. But yeah, besides the technical quality, it's not like the concept of a moving picture, even scary ones, was that unheard of at the time. Let me explain. So a couple of words about the history of cinema. So the birth of cinema is more like a chain of several inventions, each getting closer and closer to what we now understand as movies. So it wasn't like moving pictures not existing at all, and then someone was like, what if movies? And then invented them and boom, now there's movies. It was a really long process. The basic idea of a moving image has been known for centuries, even millennia. Shadow plays have been a thing for a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if cavemen did that. And when we really get to it, shadow plays are essentially a primitive form of moving picture as well. But perhaps early modern examples like camera obscura seem more familiar to us as a prototype of cameras and movies. So one interesting example I'd like to point out in the history of cinema are so-called magic lantern shows, also known as phantasmagorias. And historians often name them as part of the cinema's prehistory. They were a primitive form of projected moving pictures first used in the 1600s. And the way they worked were like these usually traveling showmen used these glass slides with images painted on them, and those were then projected to the audiences. And they also used things like levers to create the illusion of movement. And at the end of the 19th century, magic lantern shows had become really common and familiar to audiences. They were pretty much a part of everyday life, like movies before movies in a way. So it was pretty common that the aim of the Phantasmagoria show was to scare the shit out of the audiences. Like they showed these spooky images of monsters, ghosts and other terrifying beings coming right at the horrified spectators. And here you can see an example of images used in that magic lantern show. It tells us that people at the time were frightened by things like ghosts, spiders, demons, spooky skeletons, Napoleon, and what the fuck, demon enemas. And if you look at the art depicting these kinds of shows, people got jump scared pretty badly. I like this one where some dudes just try to beat the shit out of a ghost with the sticks. But these magic lantern shows connect pretty nicely with our train movie. They were both illusions that were allegedly so convincing that there existed at least an idea of someone getting actually scared by them. But my point here was that because they were so popular in the 1800s, people were kinda used to seeing scary stuff projected on screens. It had been a thing for centuries at that point. And another important key to the rise of cinema is of course the development of photography, which took place earlier in the 19th century. Like after all, cinema is to put it plainly just a series of photographs shown rapidly, creating an illusion of movement. So it's not surprising that many of the pioneers of moving pictures were also interested in photography. Photographs also made the idea of lifelike images familiar to people. And at first, both photographers and cinema pioneers were mainly interested in the science part of things, like the early movie technology was used as a tool to study movement. But with the new advancements of photography and moving pictures came the idea of using this technology as a form of entertainment. It had also become interesting in monetary ways. Viewing proto movies was kinda awkward, like people used these kind of peep boxes that you look into and only one person at a time could view them. And in fact, the father of the Lumiere brothers, Antoine, got into cinema business by these kinds of peep boxes. Antoine Lumiere was interested in photography, running a business in the field with his sons Auguste and Louis, and one day Antoine saw one of these peep show-like machines called the kinetoscope, which was developed by Thomas Edison's group. You know Thomas Edison, right? Everyone's favorite inventor. But the kinetoscope experience had some problems. Long lines gathered behind the machine, and yeah, it's not the most comfortable way of watching movies. So there was a demand for movies that are projected to a screen, a viewing experience similar to a magic lantern show. By that way, a lot more people could enjoy the film at the same time, and they also want to mess up their backs. So Antoine Lumiere might have seen the commercial opportunity with rising cinema technology, and he told his sons that they should make a moving picture machine as well. So the boys got to it together with some engineers working for them. The Lumiere brothers would not consider themselves as artists, they were more like engineers and inventors. So they were more interested in the machine's technical aspects, not using movies as a form of artistic expression. And overall, things like narratives and film as a method of telling stories would come out a bit later, with the novelty of this mundane, everyday life displaying movies had word off. Like at this point, ordinary scenes from real life were more than acceptable to audiences, as they marveled just at the fact that humankind can even make something like this. But these kinds of films cannot keep them interested for a long time. So already in the first years of the 20th century, narrative movies had become a norm. But hey, let's talk about the movie itself. Now, first of all, in a lot of cases, this movie is claimed, or rather have remembered, to be the first movie ever made. Well, it wasn't really the first one, it wasn't even the first movie made by the Lumiere brothers. But while it wasn't the first one, many find the train movie to be one of the most iconic pieces of the early cinema, partly because of the legend surrounding it. So, Arrival of the Train shows a train station in the French town of
La Ciotat,
which is in the southern coast of the country. The station is still around to this day, and today the station building reminds passerbys of its big role in the history of cinema. Here we can see kinda the same view today as is in the movie. But I know this is a sort of a cliché, but yeah, it really is kind of haunting to see moving people from this era, not just static photographs or paintings. Like, they were out there living their lives just as we do now. They seem so familiar yet foreign at the same time, with their different cultural norms and fashion sense. The Lumiere brothers movies became a huge hit almost instantly, and shows started to appear more regularly, so everyone who wanted could see them. It didn't take long for the films to travel outside of France as well. The train movie was seen in the UK and Belgium at the very same spring of 1896, so only a couple of months after people in Paris saw it for the first time. Now, when we think about the train movie and its alleged scariness, one question might cross your mind. Was it intended to be scary? It has been listed online as the first horror movie, but did the Lumiere brothers intend to make audiences react with horror? And according to my sources, we don't know that for sure. They might have wanted to make it appear as the train was approaching directly at them, but that might have been more about the realism, not necessarily creating a scary effect itself. So, how can we find out how people reacted to the first movies? Well, one of the most important sources are newspaper reviews of them. Several papers, both in France and all over the world, were reporting about the developments of cinema, praising these moving photographs and the future of technology. Arrival of the Train also got a lot of coverage, and some of the articles do mention how the patrons were feeling about the movie. Like, for example, Lyon Republican wrote about the movie in January of 1896.
It was the most marvelous spectacle we have ever seen. The feeling you get when you see these lifelike images is one of astonishment mixed with admiration for human genius. You come away rubbing your eyes and not quite sure you're not the victim of a dream. So extraordinary do the things that have just taken place seem. It is certainly only an illusion, the one so strikingly real that you feel transported to the characters on the screen. We are tempted to speak to them or answer the questions they seem to be asking us. These retrospective pictures to which movement suddenly gives a soul are disturbing in a way I cannot describe. How astonishingly true is the locomotive that has just been signaled entered the station with thick plumes of smoke. It glides along the tracks with such speed that you instinctively pull away from the iron colossus lest it come down on you. But there's nothing to fear. The train stops, everyone gets off, the doors open, and new passengers climb into the carriages at the signal of the station master.
Translator notes that this really praising review was likely written by a collaborator of Lumiere brothers, so this was likely an ad for his buddy's movies. The only thing that implies about the spookiness of the movie is the mentioned reflex of pulling away from the screen, but this is likely a rhetorical tactic and not an actual description of fear in the cinema. Other reviews from the Lumiere's original show and others all over Europe and the US are similar in their wording. They mention people kinda trying to avoid the train, but this was more like a mix of amusement and thrill, like a rollercoaster ride, and not an actually scary experience. Audience members likely anticipated feeling some kind of anxiety watching movies, and they were seen at the time as spectacles and curiosities, not the same way we watch movies today. Yeah, these early contemporary reviews, they are pretty far off from the later known legend about a mass panic taking place. Yeah, and if the panic was real, you would think that writers would have highlighted that even more. Now sure, these reviews might imply that some of the patrons were a little bit anxious, but slightly moving in your seat, that is far off from going apeshit in the cinema like the legend claims. this kind of reaction also sounds far more believable, especially when we remember that even though people were kinda already used to the concept of moving pictures, they weren't used to seeing something this hyper-realistic projected on a silver screen. According to the historians who have studied the reviews, only a few of them mention anything about the audience reactions. They are mostly about the reactions of writers themselves, and rarely there was any mention of absolute panic, and the vibe you get from reading them is more about enthusiasm, not fear. However, there were some exceptions, like this one dude who recorded a year later his experience of a cinematograph show held in Switzerland in 1896. Apparently, according to him, more nervous spectators started to scream at the approaching train. So okay, this is closer to the legend, but still we talk about only a smaller part of the audience, not the whole crowd like the story usually implies. Meanwhile, in the United States, Americans saw similar their very own train movies. One of them was called the Empire State Express, and that came out the same year the Lumiere Brothers train film actually came out, so again 1896. This movie was made with bioscope by William Kennedy Dixon, who at the time worked for Thomas Edison. Most of the writings about this film describe the same enthusiasm as the arrival of the train got, when apparently audiences excitedly applauded and cheered at the end. But yeah, some accounts do mention more dramatic reactions, like allegedly some individuals did faint during a screening. But yeah, there are no records of actual mass panic from police reports or Lumiere's own texts, and you will think that this would be mentioned. After all, people stampeding out of the cramped halls, that could be potentially dangerous and injuries would be likely. Because yeah, the Grand Café Salon Indienne, where the first train movie showing took place, it was not at all like cinemas are today. Like it had these steep stairs that lead to the small room that had around 200 seats, and each showing took around 20 minutes, and after that people had to hurry to leave room for the next patrons who were waiting patiently in a line. So yeah, if there would have been a mass panic, we could read about it, because that sounds like a hospital trip. The panic reactions were already being parodied in the early 1900s, so shortly after the train movie. So the idea of people going apeshit at the cinema was already well known, and movies accepted their audiences to be familiar with the concept. In a film named The Countryman and the Cinematograph from 1901, a man sees several different movies, reacting to them overly enthusiastically. The last movie he sees is about a train approaching, and the man gets startled by it, running away from the scene. Next year came out Uncle Charles and the Moving Picture Show, where similarly a countryman runs away from a movie train. So there is a pattern here. These movies always depict men from the countryside as dumb hillbillies who act like toddlers in the movies, thinking the things happening on screen are real. So, the origin of the legend of scary movie train seems to be as old as the movie itself. It wasn't exactly the same as we know it today, but journalists and other writers at the time already exaggerated audience reactions in order to describe how amazing it felt to see the sensational new medium. It was a rhetorical trick to make readers understand how strong the illusion was, and perhaps convince them to see the movie themselves. Now the thing is, something really interesting happened in the coming decades, like these anecdotes got exaggerated even more in the 20th century. When people reminisced about the train movie decades after the fact, they start to sound a lot more familiar to us. Like for example, former projectionist Gustav Schönwald remembered his time at the Berlin's first movie parlor back in 1896, and this was written by him in 1960, so decades after the fact. The audience generally still played along then and reacted to all events in the films. They cried out when a horse reared or fled from their seats because they thought the approaching train would run right into the hall. Well, one still had a completely naive attitude toward film at the time. Francis Dublier, who also used to work as a cinematograph operator, recorded in the 50s, so again half a century later, that his audiences in 1896 Amsterdam and Brussels also panicked in masses when they saw a train. He even had to start giving speeches beforehand to explain that no, the train is not real and it would not come out and crush them. So the later the anecdote is made after the fact, the crazier it seems to get. In the contemporary accounts, only one or a couple of cinemagoers reacted sort of dramatically to movies, if anyone at all. When these stories were retold later in the 20th century, the couple of people suddenly turned into whole crowds, and mild flinching and gasping turned into hysteria, running away from the room and screaming in masses. It kind of worked like a telephone game, like more and more gets misunderstood and generalized, so the story gets more outlandish with every retelling. The actual legend has now been born, so now the idea was that the naive 1800s people, when they saw the first movies, they panicked in masses, they couldn't comprehend it. And one thing to keep in mind is that already in the early 20th century there was a cultural need to distance ourselves from the very early movie spectators. This is because of the common idea that those in the past are in some way beneath us, current day people. So writers and those remembering like to fixate on the panicky reactions and exaggerate them, consciously or not. The whole 19th century audiences were generalized into panicky simpletons, while the cinemagoers of that day, like in the 50s for example, were more sophisticated and smarter. Stupid 1800s people being scared of a train. Oh, I couldn't have fallen for that. And yeah, this also relates to our own attitudes regarding the legend today. Like the reason why the story gets repeated all around the internet and casual conversations today is that we also like to laugh at how silly people were in the past. And this is a very understandable idea. My point in this video is like not to scold anyone or make fun of anyone for believing this legend. So I don't want to be like, no, they weren't stupid, you are stupid. Like I get it. We believe all kinds of shit when it's about people in the past because they seem so distant and different to us. But yeah, it's common to think that someone's own time is a peak of human civilization as a part of a linear sense of history where life, society and technology keeps on getting better and better. And yeah, in the Belle Epoque era, they didn't know as much about the world as we do, and the technology wasn't at the same point as ours, so it's easy to think that people were more simple-minded than we are. But still, they were probably more similar to us than we realize. And like it is today, there have always been people both incredibly smart and absolute brain deads. Like people from the past shouldn't be thought as one collective where everyone thinks and acts the same way. Early chronicles of cinema history repeated the legend of panicking audiences. Critics and writers like Lotte Eisner wrote the spectators in the Grand Café involuntarily threw themselves back in their seats in fright because Lumiere's giant locomotive pulling into the station seemingly ran towards them. And these kinds of mentions have been passed on by historians ever since. Usually, scholars mention the tale only briefly. Their works weren't focused on the legend itself, them being usually more general works about the whole history of cinema, so the writers didn't really fully go into it to check if the tale was even true or not, since it was a relatively small thing. So after dozens of retellings, the legend got questioned and debunked in the turn of the 21st century. Leutwinger states that the myth is a way for critics, journalists and historians to kind of emphasize the power of illusion in movies. And yeah, these articles and books, they were written by people that obviously love movies, so it kind of makes sense that they reinforce their ideas of films being these amazing, almost magical forms of entertainment. So to repeat, the story of Panicking Audiences started with the movie's early reviews where journalists thought how lifelike the cinematography was. They emphasized either themselves or rarely others' reactions where a hyper-realistic terrain made them uncomfortable. In the later decades, after the First World War especially, the claim was made that actually the reactions were more severe. So there was a common and natural reaction to the past. People from the past were seen as more primitive while we ourselves have progressed. This idea was repeated by several scholars when the history of cinema was written down. It was mainly during the 1990s when historians actually started to look things up and noted, hey, by the way, this story that has been repeated for decades, yeah, it's actually kind of bullshit. But whether or not people actually got anxious and swifty in their seats, we can't know that for sure, like 100%. That would take a time machine pretty much, and it might be possible that some individuals actually did panic, but the idea of entire crowds freaking out, yeah, it's safe to say that no, that didn't happen. Yeah, but why did the early journalists and later writers, why did they write like that? Like, what is the context behind these escalating claims? Well, we can actually specify several bigger phenomena that caused the legend to be born. At least in some cases, there might have been a commercial motive. Days like this, and especially the more bombastic reviews, they made the movie more interesting to patrons. So they were pretty much like, hey, you wanna check out this crazy new thing called the cinematograph? I heard people freaked the fuck out and ran away when they saw it. So of course people would be like, hell yeah, I wanna see that. Like most of us do like thrilling experiences but felt in a safe, controlled environment. And some movie exhibitors use the alleged reactions as publicity stunts. Like in New York, paramedics were waiting at the screening hall's entrance to show everyone passing by that there was help ready for the more nervous ones. And of course, people passing by were like, hey, that seems pretty cool that this movie is so epic that they need an ambulance to be ready. And if you really think about it, nothing has really changed regarding this matter. Like audiences' strong reactions, they are still used as a marketing technique to this day. Just look at the way horror movies like Terrifier 3 or The Substance, like they had this big fuss around them when several news articles were made about them that allegedly some cinemagoers fainted or threw up and left. One thing I've been thinking about is, could there be a sort of patriotic pride wielding these stories? If you would show American films to the Frenchmen, they would probably just turn to dust instantly from the sheer epicness. Like maybe they wanted to claim that their own movies were so realistic that people actually screamed and not just leant back to their seats like the French did. And we are talking about an era where nationalism was already a thing, a big thing, where Western nations want to emphasize their own distinct culture and its strength. And I noticed this while checking out the Arrival of the Trains IMDb reviews. This one French reviewer mentioned that they really thought about the train movie at school, as well as the legend surrounding it. So I was wondering that has this been a common thing in French schools? And if so, is the idea again to highlight today how amazing the French in particular were as pioneers of cinema? Like again, being so great that they were able to convince audiences that the real train was coming. While researching this topic, I've noticed that it kinda depends on your country of origin when discussing who made the first ever movie. Like in France, they like to say it was the Lumières, and on the other side of the Atlantic, it was Thomas Edison. When I read some American websites about the history of cinema, Lumières are sometimes hardly ever mentioned when Edison is praised as the cool and epic father of cinema. Now, the question of the first ever movie is kinda complicated and it's not easy to pinpoint the exact moment cinema was born, especially one that everyone would agree with. And my point in this tangent is that when people talk about the effect of early movies, sometimes they are coming from a place of national pride both today and in the past. Or at least that's just a theory. One really important thing is that in the 1800s, people were kinda scared of trains. Trains were popularized around the same time that movies became a thing. They were both symbols of the modern industrial culture, which changed the ways we understand movement and vision. Trains were kinda uncanny to the people at the time, and you couldn't really understand how exactly they worked. It was basically like black magic then. And trains were seen as dangerous things. They were too fast, noisy and unsafe. Even though at the time of the first Lumière screenings, trains traveled at a speed of like 40 to 60 kilometers per hour or 25 to 37 miles per hour. So by today's standards, trains were not that fast, but to people back then it was basically unheard of. And most alarmingly, newspapers reported regularly on new train accidents, making the public fearful of these steel monsters. Railroads encountered opposition pretty much everywhere they were built, but they were most hated in France and UK. The train was associated with anxiety since the beginning, and for some people it was so bad that doctors would classify it as a new disorder called the railway spine. This psychosomatic trauma-related neurosis was about the fear of an an accident, sometimes caused by actual trauma of past accident. This caused psychological as well as physical symptoms like anxiety, migraines, personality changes, even panic attacks, and those suffering from this neurosis were scared simply by being near a railroad. This illness was known since the mid-1800s to at least to the end of the century, difference being that it was later known as more general traumatic neurosis. But anyway, the existence of this illness is good to know while thinking about if anyone was actually frightened by the train movie. It did seem to cause PTSD-like symptoms, so maybe some individuals had some strong reactions caused by a past trauma. And the popular opinion also established the connection between trains and fear, so it was not only a thing for the people suffering from this disorder. And there actually was this train accident in Paris, in fact only 2 months before the first screening of the Lumière movie. So on October 22nd, 1895, a train was derailed at the Montparnasse station, breaking the wall and falling down to the streets of Paris, killing a newspaper vendor. The accident might have been on the minds of Parisians while seeing the train movie, making them uneasy by the reminder of that disaster. So yeah, just a very fun little fact. So both the railroads and trains and moving pictures were seen ambivalently in a very similar way. Some people thought they were a good thing, some absolutely despised them. Both were seen as a sort of democratizing forces when everyone could use them regardless of who they were. On the other hand, both trains and movies stirred fear of traditional lifestyles, eradication and moral corruption, which are typical every time a new form of technology or medium appears. Like we have since then seen with things like rock music, video games and comics, movies were seen as a morally bankrupt garbage. People wanted to prove that movies are able to really mold and manipulate their audiences, so the fictional panic reactions were taken and stated again as facts to prove how powerful movies are with the ability to influence audiences. Instead of going to church, more people went to the movies, which of course pissed off some religious groups. At least in the US, some groups thought that movies were just about to destroy the whole middle class values and morals. The whole public's morality was in danger, and places showing movies were these evil, shady places that were compared to brothels and gambling dens, the dark side of urban life. The subjects of the early movies were seen as vulgar, too commercial and frivolous, not sophisticated and honorable high art at all, which would be far better for the masses. Medical and educational groups also connected movies to alcoholism, mental illnesses, social unrest and perversions. So cinemas were pretty much seen as these degenerate machines brainwashing people into pervy criminals. Many scholars pointed out that the legend was mostly about the people seeing movies themselves. It relates to the question who exactly was seeing the movies. According to my sources, films were pretty much popular among all social classes and demographics. The Grand Café, ground zero of Lumière cinematograph shows, it was popular among the middle class especially. But the working class and those living in the countryside, they also saw the movie around the same time, either in the city or fairgrounds or other events held in the country. Movies were a democratic mass medium that appealed to pretty much everyone, regardless of class. But still, people at the time and later historians have seen different audiences in different ways. Remember when I mentioned the movies that parody the scary train effect? Like, yeah, it's not a coincidence that every time the person freaking out is a countryman. The contemporary reports of the train movies, they were made from the middle class's point of view, projecting their own values and ideas. And this is because writers were mainly city-born middle-class men themselves. So the issue is about prejudices against the lower classes and those who live outside of a city. It was a way for writers to establish class distinctions and refuse the democratization of mass media. And yeah, the media of the time was full of jokes and mockery of counter people, like how stupid they are, they don't understand the modern life or city life. So some historians repeated these stereotypes by describing panicking individuals as being likely from the working class or counter trash, and they just couldn't understand movies like the urban middle class could. So these historians have argued that those from the country weren't as used to the concept of moving pictures being cognitively untrained, so that's why they had different reactions to the movies comparing to the middle classes. So they had the same point of view as the earlier journalists and writers, keeping the country people dumb. And also bad argument that has been around for like 100 of years. However, there's a lot of proof backing up a claim that those in the countryside were just as familiar with movies as the city folk. The modern world was not isolated in metropolises, and country folk were not totally unaware of it. With better mobility and more free time on their hands, it was easier to travel to the nearest movie parlor, even if you lived in the middle of nowhere. There were also traveling parlors that went to the smaller villages in the countryside. This happened for monetary reasons. Those in the country had less opportunities to see them, making the demand of them higher. So it was a lucrative business to buy a projector and travel around with it to show movies to people. So, at least in the UK, movies were seen in the countryside just a couple of months after the very first showing in London, spring of 1896. So, a lot of my sources actually claim that the difference between cities and countryside wasn't even that big, like everyone saw the same movies at around the same time. So the claim that the movies were an actual mass medium and a democratizing force, yeah, it seems to be true. In the 1800s, the growing middle class had developed their own distinct culture as a way to differentiate themselves from other classes. So they were like, yeah, we are not like those people. Yet things like better living conditions, growth of free time, and democratizing trains and movies made the gap between the lower classes and the middle class narrower. This did not please the middle class, who wanted to seem better than them. They felt like they were less special now. So when they were amazed by movies, they at the same time mocked others' amazement. So when they say, wow, it's just like real life, it's understandable. But if a worker from the country said the same thing, they were a moron who can't obviously differentiate between reality and fiction. What a fucking dumbass. But yeah, it might be that the middle class people were actually the ones being anxious about the modern, rapidly changing world. This uneasiness was then projected to the working class and country folk, outsourcing one's own fears to others. Yeah, I'm not scared. You are scared. They were unsure of how the modernization would affect their social status and everyday life, so they coped with their assumed better taste. Especially in the later half of the 1800s, innovations and accomplishments of science challenged people's ideas of what was possible, like the X-ray being experimented several times during the 1800s. It could make the invisible visible. Entertainment was using illusions all the time, further challenging conceptions of reality. Movies were seen as illusions similar to a magic show's trickery of your own eyes. In fact, the projectionists were sometimes referred to as they were some kind of magicians themselves. They were able to bring unmoving objects to life and dead people alive once more. They were able to capture certain time and space and bring it to another on demand. Illusions were a huge trend back then, enjoyed by all classes. There's no doubt that the audiences in the very late 1800s, they were really astonished at the spectacle. Some might have even reacted like they were on a roller coaster ride, with glee and safe kind of anxiety. They were fully aware that everything they see on the flickering screen isn't real. But that doesn't mean that there can't be strong emotions while watching a movie. It's the same thing today. Remember the times when you have felt strongly about the movie, how they have made you laugh, sad or scared. We all know that they aren't real. Today, illusions made by movies are only stronger. We get attached to well-written stories and fictional characters played by talented actors and actresses that make the movie come alive with other aspects of filmmaking. Like special effects can be so realistic, it's almost like real life. A well-made movie makes us forget that it's a movie, making us react to them like they were happening in real life. Even though the relationship between movies and their audiences were different back in the day, I will still argue that ultimately reactions are about the same, because after all, we all came to be entertained by illusions. Even though it isn't true, the story about panicking audiences, it's kinda telling about the magic of cinema. It makes us wonder that how amazing it must have felt to see a movie at the time for the very first time ever. Because of the legend, Lumiere's arrival at the train has become one of the most iconic early films. The approaching train symbolizes the approaching of a new era, a new medium. By the way, someone invented a camera gun. Now that's epic.